The Gilded Cage. Elena Mercer arranged the appetizers on the silver platter with trembling hands, checking her reflection in the kitchen's polished surfaces. She adjusted her designer dress, selected by Lucas, of course, and practiced her smile. Not too wide, not too reserved. Perfect, just as her husband demanded. "They'll be here in 5 minutes," Lucas called from the living room of their penthouse apartment. "And for God's sake, don't tell that boring story about Venice again. The Wilsons are important clients." Elena swallowed the retort that rose in her throat. Once she would have teased him back. Once, before their marriage had devolved into this carefully choreographed performance where she played the role of the perfect, silent wife. Lucas Mercer, with his striking good looks and charismatic smile, was Chicago's rising star in investment banking. At 36, he had the world at his feet, and a wife who served as the perfect accessory. Elena had been an art curator when they met 5 years ago, her gallery showcasing promising new artists. Her passion had attracted Lucas initially, but after their wedding, he'd slowly convinced her to quit. "You don't need to work," he'd said. "It's embarrassing for a man in my position to have a wife who makes so little." The doorbell rang, and Elena straightened her shoulders. Showtime. "There they are!" Lucas opened the door with practiced enthusiasm, embracing John Wilson, his potential new client. Come in, come in. I see you've brought the lovely Diane. Elena, darling, take their coats." Elena stepped forward with a gracious smile, extending her hand to their guests. "It's wonderful to meet you both. Dinner is almost ready." The evening progressed as so many others had. Lucas dominating the conversation, Elena serving drinks and nodding at appropriate intervals. She'd learned to fade into the background until needed for some anecdote that highlighted Lucas's success. "My wife used to run a little art gallery," Lucas mentioned casually, his hand resting possessively on Elena's knee. "Nothing major, of course. Just local artists. She's much better suited to planning our social calendar now." Elena felt the familiar ache in her chest. The gallery had been her dream, the culmination of her art history degree and years of networking. Now it was reduced to a little hobby in her husband's narrative. "Did you specialize in any particular style?" Diane asked, her eyes kind and interested. Before Elena could answer, Lucas laughed. Elena's taste was always a bit unconventional. Thank goodness she has me to guide her now. The Wilsons chuckled politely, and Elena felt herself shrinking further into the plush dining chair. This was the pattern, Lucas building himself up by diminishing her, subtle enough that guests often didn't notice, but devastating in its cumulative effect. Later, after the Wilsons had left and Lucas had praised her for not embarrassing him, Elena stood alone on their balcony overlooking the city lights. She remembered the vibrant woman she'd once been, confident, creative, full of plans for her future. Where had that Elena gone? In the reflection of the glass door, she caught a glimpse of herself. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, empty eyes. She barely recognized herself anymore. Lucas had molded her into his ideal companion, erasing the parts of her he found inconvenient. Tomorrow would be another charity luncheon where she'd smile beside him, another evening where she'd listen to him belittle her intelligence in front of his colleagues. Another day of slowly disappearing. Elena wiped away a single tear. She wondered how many more days she could endure before there would be nothing left of her at all. The final straw. Annual Barrett Foundation Gala represented everything Elena had come to dread, an evening of forced smiles, backhanded compliments, and standing in Lucas's shadow. She spent hours preparing, knowing any flaw would become ammunition for his criticism later. "Are you wearing that?" Lucas asked, eyeing her midnight blue gown with disapproval. "It makes you look maternal." Elena glanced at her reflection. The dress was elegant and modest. Perhaps that was the problem. Lucas preferred her in outfits that showcased her as his possession rather than her own person. "I don't have time to change," she said quietly, fastening diamond earrings he'd given her for their anniversary, a gift that came with expectations of gratitude, expressed in ways that left her feeling hollow. The ballroom of the Mayfair Hotel glittered with Chicago's elite. Elena plastered on her practiced smile as Lucas guided her through the crowd. his hand pressing possessively against her lower back. "Lucas Mercer," called Philip Barrett himself, the silver-haired philanthropist extending his hand. "And this must be your lovely wife." "Yes, this is Elena," Lucas replied, his tone suggesting an afterthought. "Elena, Mr. Barrett is considering our firm for his European expansion." The conversation flowed around her as Lucas charmed the older man. Elena nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals. The role she'd perfected over years of such events. "Mr. Mercer, your quarterly projections were impressive," said a striking woman who approached their circle. She extended her hand to Lucas. "Sophia Reeves, VP of Operations at Lindell Corp." Lucas's demeanor changed instantly, his smile becoming genuine, his posture straightening with interest. "Ms. Reeves, I've heard remarkable things about your work." Elena recognized the look in his eyes, appreciation, respect, desire, emotions he hadn't directed at her in years. As the evening progressed, Lucas practically orbited around Sophia, leaving Elena to drift between conversations alone. She found herself at the bar, requesting a stronger drink than usual. "Make that too," said a kind voice beside her. A woman with warm brown eyes and a scarlet dress offered a sympathetic smile. "These events can be exhausting. I'm Rebecca Chen." "Elena Mercer," she replied, grateful for the friendly face. "I know," Rebecca said. "I attended your exhibition at Prism Gallery 3 years ago. Your eye for emerging talent was exceptional." Elena blinked in surprise. "You remember that?" "Of course. Whatever happened to that artist who worked with reclaimed materials? Gabriel something?" "Gabriel Torres," Elena said, warmth flooding her chest as she remembered. "He's showing in New York now. I always believed he'd make it." For the first time that evening, Elena felt like herself, discussing art and artists with someone who valued her expertise. The conversation flowed naturally until Lucas appeared, his expression tight with annoyance. "There you are," he said, cutting Rebecca off mid-sentence. "I've been looking everywhere." "Lucas, this is Rebecca Chen. She's a collector who visited my gallery years ago." He barely acknowledged the introduction. "We're seated with the Barretts for dinner. Come along." At the table, Lucas positioned himself between Elena and Sophia Reeves, effectively turning his back to his wife. Elena sat in silence as he lavished attention on the other woman, laughing too loudly at her jokes. The final blow came during dessert. Philip Barrett, slightly intoxicated, gestured toward Elena. "Lucas, you must tell us how you met this charming woman." "What caught your eye?" Lucas glanced at Elena dismissively. "Oh, Elena was pretty enough back then. A bit more vibrant than now. You know how it goes. Marriage makes some women comfortable. Not like Sophia here, who clearly makes an effort." The table fell silent. Elena felt blood rushing to her face as humiliation burned through her. She saw pity in Rebecca's eyes across the table, and something worse in Sophia's, embarrassment on her behalf. "Excuse me?" Elena whispered, rising from her seat with as much dignity as she could muster. In the ladies' room, she stared at her reflection, the carefully applied makeup, the styled hair, the woman she no longer recognized. 5 years of diminishment, of cruel words dressed as jokes, of being treated as an inconvenience rather than a partner. Something inside her broke, and something new took root. When she returned to the table, she didn't sit. Instead, she collected her clutch, placed her napkin beside her untouched dessert, and leaned close to Lucas's ear. "I won't be coming home tonight," she said softly, "or ever again." She walked out of the ballroom without looking back, her steps growing steadier with each foot of distance she put between herself and the man who had spent years convincing her she was nothing without him. Seeds of renewal, Elena's first week of freedom, unfolded in Rebecca Chen's guest bedroom, surrounded by modern art and the scent of jasmine tea. When she'd left the gala, she'd had nowhere to go, just the desperate need to escape. Rebecca had found her in the hotel lobby, tears streaming down her face, and offered sanctuary without hesitation. "Stay as long as you need," Rebecca said, showing Elena to a sunlit room overlooking Lake Michigan. "I recognize a prison break when I see one." Lucas's calls and texts flooded her phone, first angry, then pleading, then threatening. Elena shut off her device and curled into a ball on the unfamiliar bed. 5 years of her life spent diminishing herself for a man who had never truly seen her. The realization was both devastating and liberating. On the third day, she ventured out to a small cafe 3 blocks from Rebecca's apartment. The simple act of ordering coffee without considering Lucas's preferences felt foreign. She chose a window seat and watched people pass by, wondering who she was without him defining her. "Is this seat taken?" Elena looked up to find a man gesturing to the chair across from her. He had warm brown eyes, a gentle smile, and paint splotches on his worn jeans. "No, go ahead," she replied, suddenly conscious of her unwashed hair and borrowed sweater. "Julian Rivera," he offered, extending his hand. "Thanks for sharing your table." "This place gets packed at lunch." She hesitated before taking his hand. "Elena, just Elena, not Elena Mercer. Not Lucas's wife, just herself." They sat in companionable silence until Julian pulled out a sketchbook and began drawing the street scene outside. Elena found herself watching his hands, strong, confident strokes that captured the essence of movement and light. "You're an artist," she said, the words less a question than a recognition. He glanced up, surprised. "I teach art at the community college, and you have the eye of someone who knows art." "I used to..." Elena paused, the words sticking in her throat. "I used to curate a gallery." "Used to?" Julian asked, his head tilted in genuine curiosity. Elena stared into her coffee cup. "My husband thought it was beneath me." Julian's expression darkened. "No passion is ever beneath anyone." The simple truth of his statement brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, embarrassed. "Sorry," Julian said, offering a napkin. "Not my place." "No," Elena replied, finding her voice stronger than expected. "You're right." They talked until Julian had to leave for his afternoon class. He handed her a torn page from his sketchbook, a quick drawing of her looking out the window, her profile captured with sensitivity that made her look thoughtful rather than sad. "You have depths," he said simply. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The next day, Elena activated a new phone number and called her old assistant from the gallery. Zoe answered on the first ring, her excitement palpable when she recognized Elena's voice. "The art world hasn't been the same without you," Zoe declared. "What are you doing now?" The question hung in the air. What was she doing? Who was she becoming? With Rebecca's encouragement, Elena began rebuilding her professional connections. She visited small galleries, reconnected with artists she'd once championed, and attended a local exhibition where she unexpectedly encountered Julian again. "The art teacher returns," she said, approaching him beside a striking installation piece. His face lit up. "Elena, you look different." She did look different. She'd cut her hair shorter, abandoning the style Lucas had preferred. She'd chosen her own clothes, a colorful scarf and simple dress that felt like her, not like the woman Lucas had tried to make her. "I feel different," she admitted. Julian gestured to the installation. "What do you think of Mira's work?" The piece, a series of broken mirrors reflecting fragmented images, spoke to Elena on a visceral level. "It's about reassembly after destruction," she said, finding beauty in the broken pieces. Julian's gaze was warm with appreciation. "You really do have an exceptional eye." That night, Elena sat with Rebecca on her balcony watching stars appear over the lake. "I'm thinking of starting over," she said. "Professionally, I mean." Rebecca swirled her wine thoughtfully. "What's stopping you?" "Fear," Elena admitted. "Lucas always said I wasn't business savvy enough to succeed on my own." "And you believed him because when someone tells you something often enough, you start to think it's true." Rebecca reached for Elena's hand. "Well, I'm telling you something different. You're brilliant, perceptive, and have connections throughout the art world. And I'm saying it often enough that you'll start believing it's true." The following week, Elena viewed a small storefront space in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The rent was reasonable, the location promising. Standing in the empty space, she could envision what it might become. Not just a gallery, but a community space for emerging artists who needed someone to believe in them. As she walked out, She nearly collided with Julian, who was carrying canvas bags full of art supplies. "Elena, what brings you here?" She gestured to the storefront. "Just imagining possibilities." Julian's face broke into a wide smile. "That's exactly what I tell my students to do. Would you like to grab coffee and talk about those possibilities?" Over steaming lattes, Elena shared her tentative dreams for a new kind of gallery. Julian listened intently, offering suggestions and connections to local artists. "You should meet my students," he said. "They're creating incredible work with limited resources. They need someone like you, someone who sees potential." For the first time in years, Elena felt purpose blooming inside her chest. The seed of her new life had taken root, and with each day away from Lucas, it grew stronger. The Rising Phoenix. 3 months after walking out of the Barrett Foundation Gala, Elena signed the lease on her storefront. The space, with its exposed brick walls and abundant natural light, would become Resurgence Gallery, a name that reflected her own journey as much as the artists she would feature. Lucas's divorce papers had arrived 2 weeks earlier, accompanied by thinly veiled threats about her financial future. Elena had signed them without hesitation, accepting that she would walk away with little after the prenuptial agreement. Freedom, she'd discovered, was worth more than the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. "We'll need to sand these floors," Julian said, kneeling to examine the worn hardwood. He had offered to help with renovations, bringing his practical knowledge of materials and space. Elena watched him work, admiring his focus and the easy way he moved. Their friendship had deepened over countless coffee meetings and conversations about art. She felt a warmth in his presence that both frightened and exhilarated. The stirring of feelings she'd thought long buried. The renovation became a community effort. Julian's students volunteered weekends, transforming the space with fresh paint and creative solutions for limited funds. Rebecca connected Elena with potential investors who believed in her vision. Even Zoe, her former assistant, joined the team officially, bringing organizational skills and boundless enthusiasm. "You've created something remarkable," Julian told her one evening as they sat cross-legged on the newly finished floor, sharing takeout after everyone else had gone home. Moonlight streamed through the large windows, casting silver patterns across the space. "I couldn't have done it without you," Elena admitted. "Without any of you." Julian's hand found hers in the dim light. "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you know." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Elena felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by something genuine and warm. Their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss, so different from the demanding possession she'd known with Lucas. Julian's touch asked rather than took, offered rather than expected. When they parted, Elena felt tears on her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of being truly seen. "I'm sorry," Julian whispered, misreading her emotion. "Don't be," she replied, finding her voice. "I'm just remembering what it feels like to be treated like a person, not a possession." The gallery's opening night exceeded all expectations. Elena curated works from emerging artists alongside Julian's students' pieces, creating a showcase that celebrated resilience and transformation. The crowd spilled onto the sidewalk, drawn by the buzz that had been building in. Chicago's art community about Resurgence. Gallery and its visionary founder, Elena moved through, the space in a dress of her own choosing, emerald, green that complemented her newly confident posture. She spoke with passion about each artist, her knowledge and enthusiasm infectious. Several pieces sold within the first hour, including a striking sculpture by one of Julian's most promising students. "You've created magic here," Rebecca said, appearing at her side with champagne. And not just with the art. Elena followed her friend's gaze to Julian, who was earnestly discussing technique with a collector. He caught Elena's eye across the room and smiled, a private communication that warmed her from within. "He sees me," Elena said simply. "And more importantly, you see yourself now," Rebecca replied, clinking their glasses together. As the evening wound down, a reporter from the Chicago Arts Review approached Elena for an interview. "Your journey is fascinating," the young woman said. "From leaving the art world to returning with such impact, what inspired you to create Resurgence?" Full circle 1 year to the day after Elena had walked out of the Mayfair Hotel, an invitation arrived at Resurgence Gallery. The Barrett Foundation was hosting their annual gala again, and this time, Elena's name was on the invitation, not as Lucas Mercer's wife, but as an honored guest. Her gallery's work with underprivileged youth had caught Philip Barrett's attention, and the foundation was considering a substantial grant. "Are you going to attend?" Julian asked, watching her expression carefully as she read the embossed card. Elena traced her fingers over the raised lettering. "I think I need to, for closure, if nothing else." The night of the gala, Elena stood before the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the drape of her crimson dress. Unlike the subdued elegance Lucas had preferred, this gown was bold and vibrant, like the woman she had become. "You look breathtaking," Julian said, appearing behind her in his tuxedo. His eyes held the same appreciation they had shown when she'd worn paint-splattered jeans while renovating the gallery, a genuine admiration for who she was, not what she represented. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, offering his arm. Elena took a deep breath. "More than ready." The Mayfair Hotel's ballroom hadn't changed, but Elena's perspective certainly had. She entered on Julian's arm, her head high, no longer the shadow of someone else, but a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Conversations paused as they moved through the crowd. Elena's recent feature in National Arts Monthly had made her recognizable, her story of personal and professional renaissance resonating beyond Chicago's borders. "Elena Chen Rivera," Philip Barrett greeted her warmly. "Your gallery's community outreach program is exactly the kind of initiative our foundation looks to support." As they discussed potential collaboration, Elena felt a familiar presence before she saw him. Lucas Mercer stood several feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He looked the same, handsome, polished, successful, yet somehow diminished. "Excuse me," she said to Barrett. "There's someone I should probably greet." Julian squeezed her hand supportively. "I'll be right here." Elena crossed the room with measured steps, aware of curious eyes following her progress. The whispers had preceded her arrival. Everyone knew the story of how Lucas Mercer's wife had left him at last year's gala, only to create a thriving business and find new love. "Elena," Lucas said when she reached him, his voice holding none of the confidence she remembered. "You look different." "I am different," she replied simply. "I saw the article about your gallery." He shifted uncomfortably. "Congratulations." Elena studied the man she had once believed held her entire world in his hands. "Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them until Lucas cleared his throat. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice low. "I didn't appreciate what I had until it was gone." Once, those words would have meant everything to Elena. Now, they were just words from a man who had taught her exactly what she didn't want in her life. "We both made mistakes, Lucas," she said gently. "Mine was forgetting who I was. I won't make that mistake again." From across the room, Julian caught her eye, his smile radiating support and love without possession or demand. Beside him, Rebecca raised her champagne glass in a small toast. "I should get back to my date," Elena said. "I wish you well, Lucas. Truly." As she turned to leave, Lucas reached for her arm. "Elena, wait!" His voice held a note of desperation. "Do you ever think about what might have been? If things had been different between us?" Elena looked at his hand on her arm until he self-consciously removed it. "No," she said with gentle honesty. "I'm too busy thinking about what is and what will be." She rejoined Julian and Rebecca, feeling lighter than she had in years. The final thread tying her to her past had been severed, leaving her completely free. Later that evening, Philip Barrett announced the foundation's grant recipients. Resurgence Gallery would receive funding to expand its youth programs, allowing Elena to reach more young artists who needed mentorship and opportunity. As applause filled the ballroom, Julian pulled her close. "How does it feel?" he whispered. "Coming full circle?" Elena looked around the room, at Rebecca beaming proudly, at her former husband standing alone at the bar, at the crowd of people who now knew her for her accomplishments rather than as someone's accessory. It feels like the circle is finally broken, she replied, and I'm moving in a straight line forward. That night, as they walked along Lake Michigan under a canopy of stars, Julian stopped suddenly and turned to face her. I had a whole speech prepared, he said, nervousness evident in his voice, about how you taught me what courage looks like, about how watching you rebuild yourself made me believe in second chances, about how I've never met anyone who shines as brightly as you do. Elena's heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. But all I really want to say is that I love you, Elena. Not for who you might become or who I want you to be, but exactly as you are in this moment, and every moment. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a simple emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. Nothing like the ostentatious solitaire Lucas had given her, but infinitely more meaningful. This isn't about possession or completion, Julian continued. It's about partnership, walking beside each other, supporting each other's dreams, creating something beautiful together. Tears filled Elena's eyes, not the tears of humiliation she had shed a year ago, but tears of profound joy. Yes, she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, yes. As Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena felt the final piece of her transformation lock into place. She had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but blazing with a light of her own, a light no one would ever again convince her to dim.